A royal guard's courageous stand, breaking tradition for justice. Welcome to our channel, and thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. Today, we're diving into a story that I'm sure will tug at your heartstrings. It's the kind of story that reminds us all about the power of compassion, strength, and the unexpected ways in which people, or even traditions, can break when confronted with cruelty. Let me take you to a warm, sunny day at Buckingham Palace, a day that should have been perfect for 9-year-old Oliver Weston. Oliver had been dreaming about this moment for months, eagerly waiting to witness the changing of the guard. Despite his frail body, weakened by a rare neurological disorder, his spirit was fierce and unbreakable. Clad in a navy blue hoodie, he sat in his motorized wheelchair, a small British flag folded neatly on his lap. His mother, Rachel, stood behind him, smiling nervously, guiding him through the crowded palace grounds. She could sense the excitement radiating from Oliver, even though his body didn't always keep up with his emotions. Today was supposed to be about something more. Oliver wanted to see the real guards. As they navigated through the bustling crowd, Rachel kept her focus, carefully maneuvering Oliver's wheelchair past selfie sticks, ice cream vendors, and the constant hum of tourists. They found a small open spot along the barrier, and Oliver's face lit up. The moment had finally arrived. His dream was right in front of him. 2 Queen's Guards, towering in their immaculate red tunics and black hats, ready to stand their ground. One of them, Sergeant Thomas Hale, was a 35-year-old veteran who had seen countless ceremonies in his career, but today his patience would be put to the ultimate test. Just as Oliver stared in awe, taking in the grandeur of the ceremony, a loud group of tourists approached, including Trevor Gaines, a brash and rude American. Trevor, with his camera slung over his neck like a trophy, pushed his way through the crowd, elbowing people out of the way. The crowd shifted, and suddenly Oliver's wheelchair was jolted violently. Trevor had intentionally or not shoved the back of his wheelchair, causing the boy to lurch forward. Rachel gasped, quickly steadying Oliver's chair. It could have ended there. But Trevor wasn't done. With a smirk, he mocked Oliver's disability and, in a cruel gesture, pushed the front wheel of his chair aside to get a better shot of the guards. The scene unfolded like a nightmare for Rachel, who could do nothing but plead with the rude tourist to stop. But Trevor, unbothered and unfazed, continued to belittle Oliver, laughing as if the situation was a joke. The small boy's flag slipped to the ground once again, and the crowd, momentarily silent, waited for something to change. And then, Sergeant Hale, standing rigidly at his post, had witnessed everything. His trained eyes, accustomed to ignoring distractions, couldn't ignore the cruelty anymore. He registered every movement, the shove, the mocking laughter. Something inside him snapped. Without thinking, he broke formation, striding forward with a purposeful pace. The crowd parted instinctively, a hush falling over the courtyard. As Hale approached Trevor, he raised his rifle and slammed it into the ground with a powerful crack, sending a clear message of authority. In a voice cold and unwavering, he ordered Trevor to step back. The tension was palpable, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Trevor, now wide-eyed and fearful, retreated, stammering for words that no one would listen to. But Sergeant Hale wasn't finished yet. Kneeling beside Oliver, he gently retrieved the fallen flag, dusted it off, and handed it back to the boy, paying him the respect he deserved. And in a moment that left everyone in awe, Hale saluted Oliver, saluting not just tradition but bravery, dignity, and humanity. It was a moment that would not be forgotten. It shifted the way the crowd viewed the Royal Guards, reminding everyone that while tradition matters, humanity matters even more. And this is just the beginning of a story that proves the courage of one person can change everything. So as we continue this journey together, don't forget to leave a comment below and share where you're watching from. It's always wonderful to hear from you, our amazing viewers. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that button so you can join us for even more incredible stories like this one. Stay tuned for tomorrow's tale. It's something truly special. and you won't want to miss it. As the scene unfolded, the tension grew, and the situation that should have been a simple, peaceful moment quickly escalated into something far darker. It was meant to be a perfect day, a dream day for 9-year-old Oliver Weston, who had eagerly awaited this moment for months. His frail body, weakened by a rare neurological disorder, contrasted sharply with the strength of his spirit. Wrapped in his navy blue hoodie, Oliver's face lit up as he finally caught sight of the towering Queen's Guards, immovable and majestic. His mother, Rachel, expertly maneuvered his motorized wheelchair through the sea of tourists, desperate to ensure he would have the best view of this cherished ceremony. And yet, in the midst of this carefully planned day, something changed. A force, both human and cruel, disrupted the atmosphere entirely. In a matter of moments, what had been a dream turned into a nightmare, not because of any misfortune or fate, but because of a deliberate act of disrespect. As Rachel and Oliver stood near the barricade, finally able to see the royal guards up close, a group of tourists approached, clearly oblivious to the world around them. Among them was Trevor Gaines, an American tourist who seemed to believe the world owed him special treatment. His careless behavior was already irritating, shoving his way through the crowd, elbowing people aside as if they were obstacles in his way. But it was what happened next that shifted the entire course of the day. Trevor, with his camera slung around his neck, seemed more focused on getting a good shot than respecting the space of others. In his pursuit of the perfect photograph, he didn't just brush past Oliver, he deliberately shoved his wheelchair, sending the young boy jolting forward. Rachel's gasp was sharp, her protective instincts kicking in as she grabbed the chair to keep it from tipping over. It wasn't just the force of the push that rattled her. It was the callousness of Trevor's actions. And then, as if to add insult to injury, Trevor, smirking with arrogance, mocked Oliver's disability. He turned toward the boy and made a joke about how he would never be able to march with the guards. His voice dripped with superiority, and his laughter echoed through the courtyard. At that moment, Rachel's desperation grew, but the worst was yet to come. Despite her polite plea, Trevor continued to bully her son, now deliberately shoving the front wheel of Oliver's chair aside. To get a better shot of the guards, the crowd, until then silent, began to murmur uneasily. But even then, no one intervened. It was here that the true power of human decency was tested. Sergeant Thomas Hale, standing in his immovable posture, witnessed the entire scene unfold before him. His training as a Queen's Guard demanded that he remain still, unflinching no matter what transpired around him. But for the first time in his career, that unspoken rule felt unbearable. He saw Oliver's trembling hands gripping the wheels, the flag slipping from his lap, and Rachel's desperate attempts to protect her son. What had begun as a simple ceremonial act, a public display of British tradition, had turned into something far more significant, an assault on human dignity. And then, Sergeant Hale did something no one, least of all the tourists, expected. He broke formation. He moved. It wasn't a random act. It was a decision forged in the moment by something deeper than duty. It was the choice to protect, to defend, and to stand up for what was right, regardless of the rules. As he walked toward Trevor, his presence was commanding. The sound of his boots against the cobblestones echoed with every step, making it clear that this was no ordinary moment. When he reached Trevor, Hale raised the butt of his rifle and slammed it into the ground, making a resounding crack that silenced the courtyard. The shock of the moment wiped the smirk off Trevor's face, and with an icy calm, Hale issued his command, his voice unwavering. "Step back. Now." The words hung in the air, heavy with authority. Trevor, now realizing the seriousness of the situation, stumbled backward in fear, his bravado disappearing entirely. What followed was a ripple of reactions from the crowd. The tension that had hung over Buckingham Palace like a storm cloud began to break. Applause began, slowly at first, but soon the sound filled the courtyard, resonating with respect for Sergeant Hale's unflinching decision to act out of compassion. This moment, this simple act of defending a child, had shifted the atmosphere entirely. It wasn't just about the ceremony anymore. It was about human decency, about stepping outside tradition when tradition failed to honor humanity. In the aftermath, the reverence for Sergeant Hale grew. Rachel, overwhelmed with gratitude, wrote him a note thanking him for showing her son what true courage meant. Her words, simple but heartfelt, would stay with him for a long time. "You showed my son that courage doesn't always come with medals. Sometimes it wears red and stays silent until it matters most." It wasn't about making headlines, and it wasn't about seeking applause. It was about doing what was right in the face of cruelty. In that moment, Sergeant Hale became more than just a guard. He became a symbol of what it means to stand up, not just for tradition, but for what is right. The public's reaction to this small act of defiance, this extraordinary display of humanity, spoke volumes. It was a reminder that sometimes rules matter, but compassion matters more. Sergeant Hale's simple gesture had shifted the way people viewed the guards, and most importantly, it had reminded them that true strength lies not in rigid adherence to tradition, but in the courage to break free when it counts the most. As the crowd murmured uneasily and the atmosphere shifted, something profound was unfolding at Buckingham Palace. The changing of the guard, a centuries-old tradition that had played out countless times before, was suddenly overshadowed by an event that transcended the ceremonial duties of the Royal Guard. Sergeant Thomas Hale, standing motionless at his post, had witnessed it all. Oliver's trembling hands, the fallen flag, and Rachel's desperate attempts to shield her son from Trevor's cruelty. Yet despite everything happening around him, he remained still, maintaining his unshakable discipline. But in that moment, the weight of tradition collided with the undeniable call of humanity, and the choice became unavoidable. Sergeant Hale had been trained to stand firm, to embody the steadfastness of centuries of military tradition. It was a code he had followed for years, enduring insults, jeers, and even physical confrontations without so much as a shift in posture. His role was to protect, yes, but protect what? Was it simply about tradition, or was there a greater responsibility at play, one that demanded him to break free from his rigid form and act? The situation before him, this one cruel moment of harassment and disregard for the dignity of a child, compelled him to question that very code. For 8 years, Hale had endured protests, drunks, and pranksters, but something about the way Trevor treated Oliver felt different. It wasn't just a disregard for tradition. It was a disregard for basic human decency. The pivotal moment came when Trevor, now emboldened by the lack of intervention from the crowd, shoved Oliver's chair, again pushing it forcefully to the side. The small flag fluttered helplessly to the ground, a symbol of the child's hope and excitement that had just moments ago been so vibrant. In that instant, something inside Sergeant Hale snapped. The cold, detached discipline that he had carried with him for years began to give way to a deeper instinct. His oath to endure and protect wasn't simply about guarding a place. It was about protecting people, about defending their dignity and humanity. And Oliver Weston, a young boy in a wheelchair, needed that protection now more than ever. Sergeant Hale's internal struggle was brief but intense. He had been trained to remain immovable, to ignore the chaos around him. But what was tradition if it allowed cruelty to go unchallenged? What was the point of standing still if it meant standing by while someone suffered? His decision came quickly, as decisions of integrity often do. Without a second thought, he broke formation. The very sound of his boots hitting the cobblestone resonated through the courtyard like a call to arms, demanding attention from every person nearby. His stride was purposeful, each step louder than the last, an unmistakable display of authority. As he reached Trevor, he didn't need to lay a hand on him to make his presence known. The moment was charged with a kind of palpable tension. The crowd, which had initially been hesitant to intervene, now seemed to hold its breath, watching the scene unfold in stunned silence. Trevor, still mocking, unaware of the imminent consequence of his actions, stood too close to Oliver. But when Sergeant Hale raised the butt of his rifle and slammed it into the ground, the sound echoed like a shot, a sharp, clear signal of the seriousness of the situation. Trevor, no longer the brash tourist full of bravado, immediately faltered. The smirk vanished, and fear replaced it as he took a step back, completely disarmed by the guard's unspoken command. Hale's decision to move had altered the course of this day. His actions were not a break from duty. They were a return to the essence of what his duty was truly about. It wasn't about standing still for the sake of tradition. It was about standing up for what was right, for what was just. And in that moment, Sergeant Hale did more than protect a child. He reminded everyone present of the power of compassion and the courage required to defy cruelty, even in the face of unwavering protocol. The applause that followed wasn't for the ceremony. It was for the man who chose humanity over rigidity, who stood up when it mattered most. This was the true power of tradition, not in following the rules without question, but in knowing when to break them to stand up for what was right. Sergeant Hale's choice, simple yet profound, became a testament to the enduring power of human decency, a reminder that sometimes the most important decisions are those that defy expectations. In the charged silence that followed, the question that loomed over the courtyard was simple, yet profound. Would Sergeant Thomas Hale allow this moment of cruelty to pass unnoticed, or would he make a stand? It was a decision that stretched beyond tradition, beyond duty, and straight into the heart of what it means to be human. The crowd around them, once passive and silent, now seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for a response. All eyes were on the Royal Guard, on Hale, who stood at the intersection of duty and morality, of unwavering tradition and unspoken compassion. For years, Sergeant Hale had followed the rules. As a member of the Queen's Guard, his job was clear: to stand still, to remain immovable, regardless of the chaos that might unfold around him. He had faced protests, disruptive tourists, even jeers from those who did not understand the solemnity of his role. His training taught him to block out distractions, to ignore the disturbances that could so easily derail his composure. But as he stood there, watching Trevor Gaines mock and bully a disabled child, something deep inside him stirred, something that transcended the rigidity of his training and the indifference of tradition. This moment, this deliberate act of cruelty, had broken through the facade of his stoic discipline. In that heartbeat of realization, Sergeant Hale made his choice. He couldn't let this moment slip by without intervention. Not for tradition, not for the ceremony, but for Oliver Weston, the young boy who had come all this way to witness the changing of the Guard. A child whose excitement had been overshadowed by the cruel actions of an adult needed protection. And it was in that instant that Hale understood. His duty wasn't simply to stand as a monument of military tradition. It was to protect those who needed it most, no matter the personal cost. No matter the consequences, Hale broke formation. He moved. The decision to step forward, to leave his post, was not a rash one. It was an act born of integrity, of a profound understanding of what it meant to defend not just a space, but a person. As he advanced toward Trevor, his boot struck the cobblestones with a sharp, resonant sound that cracked through the stillness. The crowd parted, instinctively making way for the guard's unyielding presence. It was as if the entire courtyard held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The moment Trevor saw Hale approaching, his arrogance faltered. The man who had been so bold just moments before now appeared visibly shaken. Hale's presence was commanding, his authority undeniable. Without a word, Hale raised the butt of his rifle and slammed it into the ground with a force that reverberated through the air, a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. The sound alone shattered the tension, instantly silencing the jeers and mockery. Trevor, once brash and defiant, now stood frozen, his bravado evaporating before Hale's silent fury. With cold precision, Hale issued his command. "Step back. Now." His voice, though calm, carried the weight of decades of discipline and the fury of an unjust moment. Trevor, now fully aware of the gravity of his actions, stepped back in fear, the smile wiped from his face. His hands rose instinctively, palms open in surrender. But the guard's righteous fury was far from over. Hale's decision to intervene to protect Oliver from further harm had irrevocably shifted the power dynamics in the courtyard. The sound of Hale's rifle slamming into the cobblestones reverberated in the minds of everyone present. It wasn't just the sound of metal meeting stone. It was the sound of a man breaking free from the confines of tradition, making a choice that would echo far beyond the palace grounds. In that moment, Sergeant Hale reminded everyone of the true essence of his Heroism. It wasn't about standing still. It was about standing up for what was right. It wasn't just about following the rules. It was about knowing when to break them, when to act in the face of cruelty. The crowd, initially silent and uncertain, began to stir with quiet applause. What had started as an isolated moment of discomfort and tension had transformed into something, a collective acknowledgement of what truly mattered. Sergeant Hale, in that decisive moment, had done what many might have thought impossible. He had used his position not just to protect a tradition, but to protect a human being. The applause that followed wasn't for the pomp and circumstance of the ceremony. It was for the man who chose to break the silence and stand up when it mattered most. The decision had been made. Sergeant Hale had chosen humanity over tradition, and in doing so, he had reminded everyone that sometimes breaking the rules is exactly what is needed to uphold the very principles those rules were meant to protect. As the sound of applause echoed through the courtyard, it became clear that what had just transpired was far more than a momentary disruption in a ceremonial routine. Sergeant Hale's decision to step outside the rigid bounds of tradition and take action in defense of Oliver Weston had ignited a powerful shift. The crowd, which had once been silent, unsure of how to respond, now stood united in their recognition of what truly mattered: human decency. What had been a simple act of kindness, a gesture of protection for a vulnerable child, had sparked a wave of public acknowledgement, and in doing so, it reshaped the very atmosphere of Buckingham Palace that day. The applause that followed Sergeant Hale's intervention was more than just an expression of appreciation. It was a resounding affirmation of the values that underpin not only the British tradition of the Queen's Guard, but also the core of human compassion. In the days that followed, something shifted in the way people viewed the Guards. No longer were they simply statues of stoic tradition. They had become symbols of something far more profound. Hale had reminded everyone that while tradition was important, it could never be an excuse for standing idly by when faced with injustice. His actions, though unprecedented, were a clear message that there were moments when humanity must come first. As the day progressed and the courtyard slowly cleared, the reverberations of what had happened lingered in the air. The palace, no stranger to moments of spectacle, had just witnessed something entirely different, an act that transcended its usual display of royal protocol. Captain Ellis, watching from the sidelines, carefully reviewed the report on Hale's actions. As the senior officer, Ellis had every right to reprimand Hale for breaking formation, for abandoning the rigid discipline that defined the role of the Queen's Guard. And yet, when Ellis turned the pages of the report, he found no anger, no reprimand. Instead, he silently acknowledged the truth of what had occurred. Hale had done exactly what any decent man should have done. There were no words of punishment, only an understanding of the gravity of the situation and the recognition of what it meant to act out of moral duty. The note that Rachel Weston had sent to Sergeant Hale would further cement the significance of the moment. In her heartfelt message, she expressed her gratitude, not just for the protection of her son, but for showing Oliver a lesson far more valuable than any royal tradition could provide. That courage doesn't always come with medals, that sometimes it wears red and remains silent until it matters most. It was a simple yet profound statement that resonated deeply with Hale, as he realized that his actions had impacted more than just the ceremonial proceedings. They had shown a child, and indeed, everyone present, that it was possible to act with integrity in the face of adversity, to defy cruelty when the world seemed willing to turn a blind eye. This wasn't just a story about one guard's choice to break formation. It was a story about how a single act of kindness, a single refusal to ignore cruelty, could create ripples that changed perceptions. The applause that had followed Hale's intervention wasn't just a public endorsement. It was an acknowledgement of the moral courage that had led him to take action. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important acts of bravery are not those that are celebrated in headlines, but those that are quietly, reverently performed when no one expects it. Sigh. The weeks passed. The story of Sergeant Hale's decision continued to reverberate beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. The public began to see the royal guards in a different light, not as mere symbols of tradition, but as representatives of something more human, more compassionate. The palace, too, took note of the shift in public sentiment. Internal guidelines were revisited, and a subtle but important change was made. The document, which had once emphasized the importance of immovable discipline above all else, now included a quiet but powerful note. In rare and exceptional moments, discretion should be used in defense of dignity. For Sergeant Hale, the recognition came not in the form of a grand award or public acknowledgement, but in the silent respect of those who understood the gravity of his actions. And when Oliver returned to Buckingham Palace months later, he found not just a guard, but a man who had shown him a lesson that would stay with him forever. Hale's small, silent salute to Oliver was not just a gesture of respect. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the courage it took for both of them to stand firm in the face of adversity. In the end, what had begun as a simple act of intervention became a turning point, not just for Sergeant Hale or for Oliver, but for everyone who witnessed it. It was a reminder that, in moments of cruelty and injustice, the true strength lies in choosing to do what is right, even when it means breaking with tradition. And sometimes that decision can change the course of history in ways we never expect. Months had passed since the day Sergeant Hale's unprecedented act of courage at Buckingham Palace. Yet the ripple effects of his decision to break from tradition, his choice to intervene when faced with an act of cruelty, had reverberated far beyond that single moment. What began as a simple act of defending a vulnerable child had transformed the perception of the royal guards. No longer were they seen as mere statues of stoic discipline. They had become symbols of something far greater: humanity, integrity, and the willingness to stand up for what is right, even when it means breaking away from tradition. Hale's actions had changed everything, and it wasn't just the public who had taken note. The very fabric of what it meant to serve as a guard, as a protector, had shifted. The quiet change was not just a shift in public perception, it was institutional. Buckingham Palace, ever mindful of its traditions and rituals, had recognized that sometimes rules and regulations need to be re-examined in light of human decency. While tradition remained crucial to the institution, the events of that fateful day had forced a reconsideration. The internal guidelines, once rigid and unyielding, now included a quiet but significant change. In rare and exceptional moments, discretion shall be used in defense of dignity. This change, though subtle, was powerful. It was a quiet acknowledgement that, while the royal guard stood for tradition, their role was not solely about maintaining unbroken discipline. It was about protecting people, preserving dignity, and acting with humanity when it mattered most. For Sergeant Hale, however, the consequences of his actions went beyond institutional shifts or public applause. His choice to break formation had forever changed him. In the aftermath of that day, Hale had returned to his post with a heavy heart, each step seeming weightier than the last. The palace remained silent, as it always did, but he felt a profound shift within himself. His breathing was deeper, his eyes clearer. He had made a choice that day, not just to protect Oliver, but to protect something far more intangible, his own sense of moral integrity. And in doing so, he had confronted the core of what it meant to be a guard, not just a soldier bound by tradition, but a human being bound by the duty to act with kindness and respect. Days turned into weeks, and the public began to take notice of the subtle changes in how they viewed the royal guards. Children waved more earnestly, tourists hesitated to provoke, and the royal guard stood taller, not just in stature but in the recognition that their role had evolved. They were no longer just ceremonial figures. They had become living symbols of courage, empathy, and respect. They were human beings, just like the people they were meant to protect. It wasn't long before Oliver Weston returned to Buckingham Palace. The memory of that day, of Sergeant Hale's gesture, remained fresh in his heart. As he rolled through the familiar courtyard once again, the moment of recognition came like a silent promise fulfilled. Hale, standing at his post, remained still, his eyes fixed ahead as always. But this time there was something different, something that spoke volumes without a single word. Oliver raised his flag high, a symbol of the bond they had shared months ago. Sergeant Hale, without a smile, without breaking his disciplined stance, raised 2 fingers to his chest in a silent salute. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes of the deep, unspoken understanding between them. The moment, captured by a photographer, wasn't dramatic. It was real. It was raw, genuine, and profoundly moving. This wasn't just about a soldier and a boy. It was about the quiet courage it took for both of them to stand firm in the face of adversity. It was a reminder that true strength doesn't always come from breaking barriers with force, but by breaking them with compassion and understanding. Sergeant Hale's small salute wasn't a victory for tradition or ceremony. It was a victory for humanity itself, and in that simple, respectful gesture, the story came full circle. What had begun as a single act of defiance had transformed into a lasting legacy, one that would resonate not just with those present at Buckingham Palace that day, but with anyone who believed in the power of doing what is right, even when the world tells you to stand still. The applause had faded, the tourists had left, and the crowds had thinned, but the change was permanent. Sergeant Hale had reminded everyone that sometimes the rules matter, but humanity matters more. And that, in the end, is what makes all the difference. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this powerful moment. What do you think of Sergeant Hale's decision to break tradition and protect Oliver? Was it the right thing to do, or should he have adhered strictly to his duties? Share your opinions with us in the comments below. It's not just about the tradition of the Queen's Guard, but about human decency and the courage it takes to stand up for what's right, even when the rules might say otherwise. Do you believe we should always stick to tradition, or are there moments when compassion and justice should come first? We're eager to know how you feel about the balance between upholding tradition and acting on personal morality. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between following the rules and doing what felt right? Tell us your story. We want this to be a place where we can have thoughtful discussions about important moments like these. Your thoughts and feedback are so valuable, and we appreciate every comment. So go ahead, drop a comment below, and let's talk about it. And remember, don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on more impactful stories like this one. Thank you for being a part of this community.